Okay, so in this section, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know when it comes to fine-tuning your patterns, all right? I'm going to go over pattern view, I'm going to go over event view, I'm going to show you how to add the humanized variation onto the patterns, I'm going to go over the mixer as well as how to add a plugin, mess around with the parameters of it, and I'm also going to go over how to add, record, edit, and clear automations, okay? So first things first, let's go ahead and get into pattern view, and the way to do that is by just hitting this pattern button up here. If yours isn't pinned like mine is, all you want to do is hit pattern view, hold that down, hit the first button, that's going to pin pattern view mode, and that's going to apply for any of these buttons you see over here as well. So before I actually go into the actual functions of pattern view, let me just go ahead and explain the difference between patterns and events. So patterns are made up of events. We've got two patterns right now. We've got a drum pattern and we've got our bluesy piano pattern. Now, those patterns are made up of events. So the events in the drums would be the kick and the snare and the hi-hats, and the events in the bluesy piano part would be the actual notes that we played when we were in keyboard mode. Speaking of keyboard mode, you're going to see that when I hit pattern on the second group that we got the instruments over here, you just see just straight dots. You don't actually see the notes that we played. That's because we're in pad mode. So if we want to go ahead and see the events, just go to keyboard mode, go back to pattern view, and you're going to see the notes that we played over there. So now let me go ahead and explain pattern view. So in pattern view, it just gives you a bird's eye view of the patterns that you have, as well as a couple of things that you can do with it. You can remove a pattern, which doesn't actually remove it, it just deselects it. All right, you can double a pattern. You'll see that we got 4 lengths. If I hit double, it pretty much like copy and pastes on itself to go from 4 bars to 8 bars. All right. If we were just to mess with the length over here, it just gives you 4 bars of empty space without really populating it. All right, if we want to duplicate it, copy and paste the pattern that we have just in another pad, another sound slot. And we also have the option to create another pattern as well as delete it. All right, and if you also want to move this around the pad, you can just hit shift, hit buttons 7 and 8, and just move it around too. Okay, so that's pattern view. Before I go into event view, there's also another way you can remove, double, and duplicate it, and that's by just using the pads down here. So if you want to remove it, like I said, it doesn't actually delete the pattern, it just deselects it. So you can just go ahead and hit that pad too. If you want to double it, just go ahead and hit shift double, and you'll see that it doubles it too. If you want to duplicate it, just hold down the duplicate button, select that pad, and you can duplicate it across numerous spots. If you want to go ahead and add a new pattern, instead of hitting this to create button, you can just hit an empty pattern or an empty sound slot, empty pad, and it gives you a new blank pattern to work with. And if you want to delete it, just hold down erase and delete the patterns. All right, so that's pattern view. All right, remember pattern view is just a bird's eye view of the patterns that you have, but events view is what actually allows you to edit the individual events that we have. So the first thing is the screen over here is just a magnified version of whatever's in this box over here. You want to mess with the box over here, you use these 4 knobs over here, and you can mess with the size of it. You can move it, left and right, and you can even go up and down. So there's 2 parts to event view. First of all, there's the editing page, and then there's a selection page. Right now we're on the editing page. And so right now you can use the 4D encoder, and you can go through everything one by one if you wanted to. That's kind of a painful way to do that, but that being said, if there's just like one note that you really just want to mess with, just go to the 4D encoder, select the note, and you can go ahead and change the position, pitch, velocity, and length of it. And so as you move the knobs, position is going to move the event left and right. Okay, pitch is going to move it up and down. Velocity changes the volume of it, and you can also adjust the length. If you wanted to, you could also use the 4D encoder, so you can move the position by just going left or right on the 4D encoder. You can change the pitch by going up and down. And if you want to change the length, just hold that button down and then scroll. So that's going to let you change the length. You'll notice that as I'm moving it left and right, you can also use nudge here too, like I showed you in an earlier video. But if you move it left or right, you'll notice that it kind of goes in grid view. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here so you can see. So if I go left and right, it kind of goes according to the grid. Now you can turn grid view off and then move it ever so slightly, Or you can keep grid view on, just hold shift and it lets you do the same thing. Okay? So that is event view, but specifically that's event view without going and selecting a range of notes. This is more if you just want to mess with things one by one. But if you want to mess with a range of notes, you're going to have to go into select view. So before I go into select view, I think it would be cool if we went ahead and had the pattern that we already have and we duplicated it and then we doubled it so we can add a variation of that in events view. So here's what I mean. We're going to take this pattern and we're going to duplicate it. Then we're going to double it. So now we have 8 bars to work with. We're going to leave the first 4 bars the way that they are, and the last 4 bars, bars 5 through 8, we're going to knock it down an octave. Okay, so now that we have a new pattern, let's go ahead and go into events view. Let's make this so that it takes up 4 bars. Let's leave the first 4 bars alone. We'll go to the last 4 bars, bars 5 through 8. And we're going to go ahead and choose our selection. So if you want to select all the notes, you can hit all and it selects the entire range despite what's in the box. None does the same thing. Up and down just moves this view up and down an octave. You can also go ahead, if you want to select all notes, you can just go ahead and do that. Does the same thing as all. And again, you can just turn the pads off. Same thing as doing none. Anyway, so let's go ahead and select the range. So now when you're in selection mode, when you're out of it, you have the choice to edit it. You have the choice to edit the position, pitch, velocity, and length of it. But when you're in selection mode, the start, end, low, and high, that's just giving you the range of notes that you want to select. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start this over at 5.11, so the beginning of the 5th bar. And we're going to go all the way to the end, so 844. Now we can choose the length of the range. It already chose it for me, but you choose the low notes and then you go to the high notes and you select that range and you just kind of tweak it until you got your selection over there. So we can go back to, we can hit select, go back to edit view, and change the position from there. If we want to knock it down an octave, we want to go ahead and hit the second knob and scroll all the way down an octave. Okay. We can also change the length and the position if we wanted to, but we could also go ahead and stay in select view and we already have the range highlighted. We can just use the 4D encoder to knock it down 12 semitones because 12 semitones is 1 octave. So let me go ahead and do that right now. All right. So if we go here and scroll, you'll see that in the first section, you'll see that in the first 4 bars, it started at C3. And on the second 4, the last 4 bars, it's going to start on C2. So that's how you mess with the patterns in pattern view, and that's how you mess with the events in event view, and how you select it and mess with all those things over there. So let's go ahead and hear it one time and just see how it sounds. So it sounded pretty good to me. One thing I want to mention is that let's say you have a selection started over here and you want to see the events as the playhead is going through this song. Just make sure that you have this follow button turned on, so when you restart it, it's going to show you the playhead and all the events that go through it. You can still scroll through everything if you wanted to. So you'll see as soon as it leaves this box over here, it switches. So you just turn on that follow button. So it's sounding pretty good. We took our pattern, we duplicated it, we doubled it, and then we edited it. We made changes to it in event view, all right? So we just went ahead, selected a range, and we used the 4D encoder to knock it down an octave, all right? So it's sounding pretty good right here. So now what I want to go ahead and do is show you how to add humanize to it. So before I do that, let me actually go ahead and do this. Make sure you go back to events view, go to select view, and make sure you got everything selected. All right, just go ahead and hit all. Then what you're gonna do is go ahead and hit this variation button, pin it if it's not, and make sure that the humanize button number 2 is illuminated. All right, and that's gonna get you into the humanize variation, and from there You can mess with the low velocity range, the high velocity range, as well as the time shift that you wanted. So I've got mine set to 100 as the low, 115 as the high velocity, and plus or minus 5%. And all you do is hit apply. So you might not have seen it on the camera, but I saw that it went ahead and moved some of these notes a little bit to the left, some of them went a little bit to the right. And so if you play it through one more time, it should have more of a human feel to it. And we can also do the same thing for the drums. So we go ahead, go into group A, go into events, select all of them, go to variation, apply it, and you'll see that some of the events shifted ever so slightly. Okay, so that is Humanize. I love that feature. So now let's go ahead and actually mess with some of the volumes of this. All right, everything's quantized. We have a variation in there. Now we got a little bit of a human element into it. Now let's really mess with the sounds. The volume of the sounds that we're working with. So all we want to do is go ahead and go into mixer, but you'll see that if you're in group mode like I am right now, you're going to see that you can only mess with the volume of the groups as a whole. What we want to do is mess with the individual sounds. So you want to go to plugin, make sure you hit sounds, button 3, then go back to mixer. So now you can mess with these individual sounds and you can go scroll through and really, make changes to them. So I'll make a few quick little changes to everything just to show you how this thing works, and then we'll move on from there. Alright, so I'm going to keep it there, kind of like how it sounds. And so now we've mixed it a little bit, alright? You saw me switch things from there, from group to group, really go ahead and tweak everything using the knobs. You also saw me go back to that volume thing I showed you earlier and turn the volume down. Okay, so now we've made our way through the mixer, alright? So now all that's left to do is show you how to add a plugin, and then from there how to add a modulation. So let's say we wanted to add a plugin to this group over here, the group A. All we're gonna do is go into plugin, hit that plugin button, go to group, and we just hit this 4D encoder to select an effect. All right, now one thing to keep in mind, if you're using an instrument effect from Native Instruments or from somewhere else, keep in mind that you can only add this instrument effect to the first slot. All right, that's the only place you can add it as far as I know. So just keep that in mind. If you want to use an instrument, make sure you load that first before you load any effect plugins. But I'm going to go back into internal, not eternal, internal, and we're going to go ahead and add a filter to this. All right, I'm not going to go through every single one of these effects because it's something that you should mess around with, something that you should play around with and see what sounds good to you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and load up the filter, and you'll see that we have 2 pages worth of parameters that we can mess with. Again, I'm not going to go through every single one of these parameters because that's something that you should do to find out what sounds good to you. All right, so if I go ahead, I've got the filter loaded. If I restart it, there you go. Now you can mess with the frequencies, you can mess with the type of, the mode that you have on the filter. You can mess with the modulation, the speed, shape of it, all these things you can mess around with. But we have this thing loaded. I'm going to keep it the way that it is. If we want to go ahead and bypass it, we don't want to remove it, but we also don't want it in effect either. Just go ahead and hit shift, button number 7 to bypass it, and it gets rid of it without deleting it. And if you just want to remove it, just go ahead and hit shift, remove, and it gets rid of the filter. Alright, so now that we have a filter, now you can also chain filter, so if you wanted to add more than a filter, you totally could. Just move your 4D encoder over to the right and select another one. Alright, but I'm just going to leave the filter on for right now. Now I'm going to show you how to add automations and modulations. So I'm just gonna say right now that you can do it on the Maschine MK3, but I don't think it's the most intuitive process. It's the same thing with EQ. If you want to EQ something, you're gonna have to load it as a plugin and then select this EQ one, and then you can mess around with the lows, the low mids, and all that shit over here. You can do it on Maschine, use the EQ as well as automations, but I think it's easier in other DAWs. I'm really only familiar with Logic, and EQ is so much easier. Mixing is so much easier on Logic than it is using it on Maschine. Same thing goes with automations. So if you really want to add automations, I would suggest doing it in like FL Studio or Logic Pro, but you can also do it here. And if you like the way it's over here, I mean, feel free, go ahead and do what you want, but just wanted to throw that out there. So if you want to go ahead and add automations, what you want to do is go ahead and hit Shift Auto, and once that button is lit, then you know that you can go ahead and program your automations. So if we go ahead and restart this, and I mess with any of these parameters, it's going to go ahead and record it and play it back. You'll see what I mean. So that's that. So any of these that you adjust, it's going to get recorded on the automations. And if you want to clear them, just hit Shift, Pad 10, gets rid of all the automations. Now it sounds normal. Alright, so that is pretty much it for this section. I know I threw a lot at you, so let me just go ahead and recap what we did. Alright, so first things first, we went over pattern view and I explained how you can remove, double, and duplicate stuff over there, whether you wanted to use the buttons up here or the pads. Then I showed you event view, but I also explained the difference between patterns and events. I told you that patterns are made up of events, and I showed you how in event view you can adjust, the position, pitch, velocity, and length of it one by one, or you can select a range of notes and then mess with it there. What we did was take a pattern that we already had, we duplicated it, then we doubled it, and then we added a variation by going in event view and knocking it down an octave. All right. After we did that, we went ahead and added a humanized variation to it because everything was quantized, everything was sounding good. We had a variation thrown in, so we went ahead and just humanized it a little bit. Once we did that, we went into the mixer. I showed you how to navigate between the group view of the mixer and the sound view of the mixer. And you saw me mess around with some of the levels on these two groups over here. Once that sounded pretty good, you saw me add a plugin. I showed you how to go ahead and, mess with the settings over there. And finally, I showed you how to add automations, edit it, and clear it. So that is it for this section. I know that was a lot, but in the next section, we're going to go over scenes, and the section after that, arrangements, and we're going to put everything that we have together. So if you're ready for that, I'll see you in the next one.